I think it's important that people are aware that, as you said, all this lifestyle, do not impact just exactly how you look, maybe.
Yeah.
A lot of people will do that for that, but actually how you can preserve your cognition or even your happiness. We could go that far, to prevent, depression.
Hi, my name is Dr. Chatterjee, medical doctor, author of The 4-Pillar Plan and television presenter. I believe that all of us have the ability to feel better than we currently do, but getting healthy has become far too complicated. With this podcast, I aim to simplify it. I'm going to be having conversations with some of the most interesting and exciting people both within as well as outside the health space to hopefully inspire you as well as empower you with simple tips that you can put into practice immediately to transform the way that you feel. I believe that when we are healthier, we are happier because when we feel better, we live more. Hello and welcome to episode 44 of my Feel Better, Live More podcast. My name is Chatterjee and I am your host. Now, as a practicing doctor, low energy is one of the commonest complaints that I see in my practice. For that reason, I have created a free 6-part video series to help you increase your energy so that you can get more out of life. If you would like to watch these videos, you can sign up to receive them at drchatterjee.com/energy. Today's episode is a fascinating conversation with one of the world's leading brain health scientists, Dr. Sandrine Thuret. Dr. Thuret is head of the Neurogenesis and Mental Health Laboratory at King's College London. She's also editor for the journal Nutrition and Healthy Aging and associate editor for the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease. Her research lab is exploring the various mechanisms that control the production of new nerve cells in the adult brain and how this impacts our mood and our memory. Sandrine's research is incredible, and in today's podcast, she gives us a masterclass in brain health. We discuss what exact lifestyle factors we can engage in to promote the growth of new nerve cells in our brain. We cover a wide variety of areas, including diet, sleep, physical activity, as well as how having sex can impact this process. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm sure that you will too. Before we get started, I do need to give a very quick shout out to our sponsors, who are essential in order for me to be able to put out weekly podcast episodes like this one. Athletic Greens continue their support of my podcast. There's no question that I prefer people to get all of their nutrition from their foods, but these days, for some of us, it's not always possible. Athletic Greens is one of the most nutrient-dense whole food supplements that I have come across and contains vitamins, minerals, prebiotics, and digestive enzymes. If you are looking to take something each morning as an insurance policy to make sure that you are meeting your nutritional needs, I can highly recommend it. For listeners of this podcast, if you go to athleticgreens.com/live more, you will be able to access a special offer where you get a free travel pack box containing 20 servings of Athletic Greens, which is worth around £70 with your first order. You can check this out at athleticgreens.com/live more. Now, on to today's conversation. So Sandrine, thank you so much for joining me on my podcast today.
My pleasure.
So I'm running a bit late, but we managed to get here, get everything set up. And, I first came across you, I think, with your TED Talk, which is doing phenomenally well. It's got over 6 million views. And you talk about something called neurogenesis. Now, I wonder if you might explain what neurogenesis is for me, but more importantly, for my listeners.
Yeah, of course. So neurogenesis, by definition, is the production or the birth of new neurons. And what has been found is that obviously as we are developing, there is a lot of new neurons that are being generated in the brain of the fetus, and then as we are born, it was thought that this production of new neurons would stop. So basically the brain is formed and this is it. Nothing, will happen anymore. the worst to come is actually we are going to, lose some neurons, but then no more new neuron will be made. And then it was then discovered in the mid-60s by Altman and Das that in a rat brain, actually, they did detect neurogenesis in the adult brain, but in a very restricted area, which is called the hippocampus.
Wow. I think people have heard of the hippocampus. It's commonly known as the memory center of the brain. It's probably a little bit overly simplistic, I imagine, and maybe you can shed some light on that. But I just want to sort of touch on something you just mentioned, which is when I was at medical school, and I went to medical school between 1995 and 2001, I'm almost certain that we were taught that once the brain has stopped developing, no new nerve cells or neurons can be produced. That was it. It was static. And what you're saying and what your research is showing is this may not be the case.
Yeah, that's correct. So I believe that there are still many places, many medical schools that indeed, just give this simplistic view that once the brain has finished developing, we can't make new neurons. And this is a big statement from Carl, so one of our peer and father of neuroscience, that says, everything may die, nothing may be regenerated. But unfortunately, it was proven wrong. And then this study I mentioned from Altman and Das, who were at the MIT in the US, where they showed that, no, look, in this rat brain, there are new neurons that are produced in the hippocampus. But their study was pretty much ignored, so that's probably why, that didn't take up. But in the field, we have to acknowledge them because they were the first one, publishing a paper showing that.
And that was in the 1960s?
Yeah, in the 60s,
wow.
Exactly. And then in the 1990s, where we developed new tools, new biological tools, where we can say, we can basically tag stem cells. And if these stem cells are becoming neurons, then we will be able to detect them. And then using this new technique, then loads of people then say, no, this is true. There is new neurons born in the adult brain of mice and rats. But what was very interesting is that it was not everywhere, all over the brain. These new neurons are generating in the adult mammalian brain only in the hippocampus, and in the rodent specifically as well in the olfactory bulb, so for the sense of smell. In the human brain, we know it's happening in the hippocampus only. It doesn't seem to be happening in the olfactory bulb, which a little bit maybe makes sense because we don't use our olfactory senses as much as rodents. But it is there. It is now shown quite robustly that neurogenesis is happening in the human brain, in the adult human brain, but very specifically in this maybe privileged area, which is the hippocampus.
Yeah, super interesting stuff. Really, in many ways, a paradigm shift. It's, from once our brain is developed and that's it, we've got all the neurons and nerve cells that we are going to have. All we can possibly hope for is to slow down the rate of decline. What this research is showing us that, hey, there might be things that we can do to help encourage the growth of new nerve cells, which is really empowering, actually. And we'll get to that in this conversation for sure. But you mentioned in rodents that they also get neurogenesis in the olfactory bulb.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure this is related or not, but we know that in humans, when we lose our sense of smell, it can be an early sign of brain dysfunction or an early sign that we're going to develop dementia. Is there any relation there at all, do you think?
So probably in animal model of Alzheimer's disease, indeed it is, shown, as you rightly said, that, they lose their sense of self early. And this mimics what we see as well in the patient. But we don't think that this has a relation with neurogenesis because it seems that in the human brain, even if we have neurogenesis, it's to undetectable level. So it might be that we have a little bit, but it's not something that we can see or we can modulate to a great extent as opposed to the rodent. So it's probably via different mechanism or it's an unrelated instance that where patient indeed lose a sense of smell. This is not because they are losing newborn neurons. They might be basically losing olfactory neurons, but it's not that they cannot make new ones. The reason they are losing the sense of smell. Yeah. So we think it is something that's probably separated.
Yeah. Now, your research is showing that we are able to grow new neurons in the hippocampus. Can we do that in any other part of the brain?
So no, I mean, from the human perspective, it seems to be very restricted to the hippocampus. There is potentially a small area, not too far, not to go into big detail, there is potentially a small area not too far from the hippocampus where maybe there is neurogenesis, but it has to be confirmed by further data. So there's one group that has shown, maybe this is happening here, and maybe these neurons are going to migrate to the striatum where we have dopaminergic neurons, but we would like a little bit more studies about that. And we don't know too much yet about this area. What we know is that what's happening in the hippocampus, that we can make, approximately, or it's an estimate, 700 new neurons in the hippocampus, on each hippocampus per day, which you can say is quite little compared to, the billions we have. But they have a specific function, even though with these small numbers, they can have a specific function.
So what is the function of the hippocampus?
So the hippocampus as a whole, independent of whether you have new neurons produced as an adult or not, as you said rightly at the start, is that it's important for learning and memory, but also the hippocampus, the ventral part of the hippocampus, is important as well for mood and emotion. So the dorsal part, the upper part, would be important for learning and memory, and the dorsal part for mood and emotion.
So does that mean then that if we can engage in practices or we can sort of apply interventions that help neurogenesis in the hippocampus, then potentially we might be able to impact our own learning, memory, mood, and emotions?
Yeah, correctly. So we have a lot of...
That's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it is. It is quite incredible. I mean, we know, so basically the basic experiment, that a scientist would do to see that, okay, what is the functionality of these new neurons? What are they for? So basically what you do is that let's block the process of neurogenesis in an animal model, in mice. We block it. And then we see, will this mice still be able to learn? And then what we could see is that if you block neurogenesis, then the mice lose certain abilities, specific ability of learning and memory, specifically spatial learning. So how to orientate yourself in a space and find your way. So this, if you block neurogenesis, then you block the spatial learning ability. And you block as well the retrieval of these memories. So this is one aspect that was shown, quite probably like 15, 20 years ago. And then more recently, what we have shown as well is that these new neurons, if you block them, you prevent pattern separation. And pattern separation is the ability to distinguish between very similar memories. So, for example, this morning you were looking for your batteries or the memory card, and you have them in the bag and probably use it a lot, but maybe, once you put it, in the front pocket, and then some days you put it in the middle pocket and sometimes on the side pocket. So the ability to remember that, it's something very similar. So the pattern separation is distinguishing between very similar memories. So now you have to decide, did I put it in the front pocket or in the back pocket?
Yeah.
So it's a spatial orientation of similar memory, or like where you are going to put your travel card when you come home at night, on the side table, on the main table. So this kind of spatial, very similar memory. So these new neurons are important for that.
Well, what's interesting about that is you're saying when you block neurogenesis, so let's say we've got, X amount of neurons in our hippocampus, and if we assume that they're functioning well, neurogenesis is the formation or the creation of new nerve cells. Is that fair to say?
Yes, absolutely.
So you're blocking the creation of new nerve cells, and that is already having an impact on people's ability to learn and their memory.
Yes.
So that makes you think, so do the existing nerve cells almost require neurogenesis to actually, do their job? Is neurogenesis, because those cells are still there, right? Yet blocking neurogenesis is affecting its ability to function. So to me, it seems as though there may be some I don't know, some synergistic benefit of them and they're both happening.
Absolutely. I mean, I was not expecting to go into so much detail, but that you are exactly onto what we think is happening, because how can so few cells have such a big impact? Well, the only way they can do that is because they are connected with the rest of the circuitry. Wow. So it's not that you make new nerve cells and they are just hanging around loosely. No, when they are born, they are going to have immediately, from very early on, they are going to have an important role because they are more excitable. So these young cells are more excitable than the old one. So this is one of the reasons that they have this specific role. But also as they mature, so they are going to survive and mature, they are going to connect to the rest of the circuitry of the hippocampus and the rest of the brain. So this is why we think they have, so little cells can have a big impact. And they are very important indeed, to have a functional, spatial memory or pattern separation, or even have an impact on mood and emotion.
It's just incredible, really. The more you learn about the human body, the more you find how very few things work in isolation. And obviously, scientists like to isolate things so they can study what they're doing, but you're finding, as in many fields, as though those new nerve cells are actually connected to the other nerve cells and they're connected to other functions of the brain. And it never ceases to amaze me how interconnected the body is. What helps to promote neurogenesis, and what helps to, what's the opposite? Sort of, decline it or switch it off? What are the good things basically, and what are the bad things?
So as you said, the brain is studying the brain is in isolation, like many of us do, exactly to refine specific mechanism, cellular and molecular mechanism. I think at this time, and this is a big trend where people are studying the mind and body, alignment, and neurogenesis is a perfect example to illustrate that what you do every day actually impact the production of these new neurons. So we can start with the bad things, maybe, we know that stress is going to decrease the number of new neuron produced in the hippocampus, and then as a consequence, then it will induce potentially, symptom of depression or similar symptom of depression when we induce stress, decrease neurogenesis, and then look at the behavior of the animal after. So this is one where this has a big impact. If you stress a mice, for example, even if it's just chronic mild stress, so little stress but every day, then we will decrease neurogenesis, and then we will see similar behavior to what human would describe as depression. So this is one.
You're showing a direct mechanism by which stress can impact mental health, by which stress can affect our ability to remember things. It's a direct mechanism there, isn't it? Because there's lots of theories behind this, and I've locked myself away for the last few months writing a new book on stress, and when I cover this a little bit in the book, and I also cover this when I'm teaching doctors on our prescribing lifestyle medicine course, that it's a little bit of stress can be a good thing.
Yes.
A little bit of cortisol can help your brain to function better.
Yes.
But you just mentioned that
the chronic mild stress
is
the bad one.
Is.
Yes. Yeah. So the chronic mild stress is the one that we know is going to decrease neurogenesis.
Do you see that, as a GP, I'm seeing lots of people now at a much earlier age, maybe sometimes in their 40s, coming to talk to me that they just can't quite remember as well as they used to. And I can't help but think that, the way we're living our lifestyles now, where we have very little downtime, we're constantly filling our brains with new information. We're waking up, we're straight onto our phones, on our emails. We're standing in a queue in a coffee shop, and instead of just taking it in, we're trying to catch up with everything. I just wonder how much of this might be impacting neurogenesis, which might be causing, digital induced early memory loss, for want of a better term.
No, that's a good point. I mean, we can't say for sure because, I mean, what we have to say is that we can't measure live neurogenesis in human. We can only do postmortem studies, or we can use proxy as we do in the lab. So it's difficult to say, to set up an experiment and say, okay, we have a group of people, being constantly on their phone, being stressed. And then we have other people that maybe, take it easier and say, for sure, we have a decreased neurogenesis. But, the clinical outcome is there, you're right. And then our mouse study showing that, chronic mild stress induce a decreased neurogenesis. When we link both, you could clearly argue that potentially neurogenesis is the mechanism by which this chronic mild stress is going to induce, maybe slight memory decline or cognitive decline. And there is a strong link in, mood and emotion and memory performance. So in patients with depression, it's quite new, but clinicians never looked before. But actually, these patients are not just depressed; they also complain with some memory loss, or that they are not as sharp as they used to be. So there is a clear link between there. And in the lab, we do think, and not only me, but the rest of researchers on neurogenesis thinks that there's a strong link on cognition and mood, and neurogenesis is really where everything is happening as an adult in the hippocampus.
Yeah, it really is incredible. So, stress, it's really quite striking what you're saying, that chronic, even a little bit of chronic daily stress might be enough to impair neurogenesis, which is, as you've already explained, is so important for so many functions of our brain. So that's one thing we need to be careful of. What else impacts neurogenesis?
So, I mean, when nothing we can do much about it, but as we get older, we still have neurogenesis, but it will go down, basically. So, so this is what has been observed as well in rodent. This is what as well we estimate in human. As we get older, we have a lower level of neurogenesis. So it is still happening, and you can still stimulate it and increase it, but naturally it will go down, which might explain why, as we get older, maybe our pattern separation is not that good. And this has been shown by many people around the world, where you have pattern separation task, where you ask people to recognize, is this a new object, an old object, or have you seen before? So this is how we can measure that. We can see that with age, naturally, people are not as good with that. And then, because obviously the population is very heterogeneous as you get older, young people will perform really well, whatever is their background or their education or their lifestyle, like if they exercise or eat, whatever, they will perform really well. But as you get older, this is where you see the difference. So where you see that you have older people who perform as good as young people, and then you look back at their lifestyle, you say, wow, these are the ones exercising, these are the ones eating well, or have a higher level of education. And then you have people that perform as the average old, and then you have the old that perform really much worse than they should be. So age has a big impact on neurogenesis.
So I guess the question then is, well, we're going to reduce our rate of neurogenesis as we get older, because that's what happens to all of us. So is there anything we can do to slow that down?
So what we know from quite a few studies, so some of my colleagues in the US, so actually my mentor, Gage, from the Salk Institute, Professor Gage, was the first one to show that you can modulate neurogenesis by the environment. So it is something that you can change. And the first experiment they did was actually showing that running in mice will increase neurogenesis. So you have these beautiful studies where you show that if you leave a running wheel in a mouse cage, just free to access, the mice actually love to run, so they will start running, and you have your control mice where they will have a cage without a running wheel. And then when you look at their neurogenesis after, you have an increase of 30%.
30%.
So yeah, this is quite huge. And then what you see is that you can do that in the young animal, but then as the animal gets older, you can increase it further. So basically, it's more efficient if you have, if you have a lower neurogenesis, running will increase it even more than if you have already a good neurogenesis. So running exercise seems to be a good a good trigger of increasing neurogenesis.
So running, lowering stress levels would clearly be a good
absolutely,
thing.
Yeah.
I think on your TED Talk you mentioned sleep as well. Is that right?
Yeah. So sleep is an important one, where there are quite a few studies there that really nicely aligned that, if you sleep deprive mice, you will have a massive decrease in neurogenesis. And it's not just small, you will have a big decrease maybe of 50%. So, and here we are talking about not maybe massively sleep depriving, so not depriving them from sleeping at all, but disturbing their sleep, maybe even just fragmenting their sleep. Will decrease neurogenesis. Wow. So there is a big impact of sleep deprivation on neurogenesis.
Yeah, I mean, do you know what's fascinating for me, Sandrine, is that, I'm very keen to promote that it's important we look after our lifestyles, and that, I'm in my years of practice, I've seen what I consider to be the four of the most important areas that have the most impact on our health, but also we've got a fair degree of control over. It's been food, movement, but equally important, sleep and relaxation. And what's incredible is that you're one of the, arguably the UK's leading researcher, but certainly one of the world's leading researchers in this field. And it looks as though that those lifestyle factors that I talk about are not just relevant for our physical health and, whether we maintain a healthy weight or not, but potentially are directly impacting our hippocampus and our ability to create new nerve cells. It's amazing because I think people often feel that, good diet, a bit of exercise, sleep. Yeah, these things are important, but where's the hard science? Where's it's almost like too obvious, but it really helps show that your research is showing that these things are so important for human beings to maintain health as we get older. Mm-hmm. I find it remarkable.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's important that people are aware that, as you said, all this lifestyle, do not impact just exactly how you look, maybe. Yeah. A lot of people will do that for that, but actually how you can preserve your cognition or even your happiness. We could go that far, to prevent, depression. So I think the hard science from our lab, obviously this is all rodent study where you are going to give a bad diet to a mice, high saturated fat diet, and then you will decrease their neurogenesis. These are, the same mice. You cannot argue that, because when you look at epidemiological study where you see that, people who are doing the Mediterranean diet versus another diet are living longer, better, they have a lower onset of Alzheimer's disease, they stay cognitively healthy longer. So we have all this nice data that already should convince the people, right?
Sure.
But on top of that, if you just give, a Mediterranean diet like, to a mice versus something which is really high fat, then you will, forget even about the behavior, but we'll see the same behavior. They will be, cognitively sharper if they follow a good diet as opposed to the high fat diet. But then if we look at their brain, you physically see that they have less of these newborn neurons that are made when they eat a high-fat diet. So really that's quite convincing. No one will argue, well, it's because maybe the people doing the Mediterranean diet are living next to the seaside and they are just happier. And I said, it might be a compound that, add on to that. But if you look at the lab, we have hard data showing that, look, these mice are in the same cage. This is super controlled studies. We just change the diet. We even have the same genetic background. We are not even talking about, different genetic background and some people are luckier than others. Here, same genetic background. We just change the diet. And then we can modulate the production of these new neurons.
Yeah, that's incredible that diet directly will affect neurogenesis. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of people listening to this will want clarification on the fact that, when we're, and obviously you are a researcher in the field, but my understanding of when we're feeding rats and rodents high-fat diets, what we're talking about is a chow mixture that's sort of high-fat and high in sugar, high in sucrose. Yes. Is that right? It's a sort of very, in many ways, reflective of the Western diet in many ways.
Unfortunately, yes.
As opposed to, let's say, somebody who was eating a Mediterranean diet, which is rich in avocados and olives and nuts, and things which are also high in fat. So I just think we should, I'm keen to clarify that it's
absolutely.
a toxic high fat and high sugar diet you're talking about in the lab.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. In the lab, it's saturated, fat as opposed to, other type of fat.
But is it with sugar as well?
So it depends. There are different type of experiments. Some people just focus on the high fat diet. Some people actually have done high sugar, which is equally bad.
Right.
And there are some mix where you say we call it the cafeteria diet for the rat, which is, high fat, high sugar, which is, equally worse. But what we have tried to do is that, and what we are doing now at the moment with a big European consortium, so working with people in Spain, France, Holland, Austria, Germany, all together, is trying to say, okay, we have these animal studies, which people say, well, how does it relate to me? Although, yes, I'm convinced that, in isolation, that works. So, potentially diet has an impact, but how, are you sure it is the same in humans? So what we are doing now is that, because I told you we can't measure neurogenesis in living human, so we are trying to find proxy. So how could we do that? And what we are doing is that we have some people all over Europe who are following like a Mediterranean-like diet, so high in olive oil, fish, vegetables, colorful, fruits. And then we have people that eat a more Western diet, maybe not so much of this fish intake and vegetables, and then they have been followed already for 15 years, and they were recruited when they were probably around their 50s, and they were followed by some of our clinicians. And what we do is that we measure their cognitive abilities. So we see that some stay stable with their cognition, and some will show basically a slope. They will have a slow cognitive decline, which is sometimes average. So what has been shown already is that the people with the Mediterranean diet, maintain their cognition better than the people who follow more Western diet. So that was known. But what we wanted now to validate in the lab is that we take the blood of these people. And what we do, we have developed an assay where we have a cell line, which is a cell line of human hippocampal stem cells. And then we put the blood of these people on the cells. So it's their blood. And we can, and we know all about these people. We know their genetic background, we know what they ate, and we know what are their cognitive scores. And now we are trying to see is that, does their cognition and diet correlate with how much their blood is going to induce neurogenesis? So I agree this is not for sure what's happening in their brain, but by taking their blood, put it on stem cells that can make neurons or not, and we measure the percentage of these new neurons, then we'll be able to validate this rodent study in a human population. So we already have some preliminary data from another study we run here in the UK, where we have people who do intermittent fasting, which we show that it improves their pattern separation. And if we take their blood on the cells, we already know that it is promoting neurogenesis.
So this sort of work you're doing on humans now is suggesting that intermittent fasting may well promote neurogenesis.
Yeah. So this we had shown already in mice, but now we wanted to show what's happening in humans. Yeah. So
may I ask what was the type of intermittent fasting? Is that what were you actually because intermittent fasting can be called so many things these days. What were you guys actually doing?
So what we wanted to compare, what was interesting is that in our mouse study, we did compare calorie restriction, so decreasing the calorie intake of the mice, let's say of 20%, versus intermittent fasting, where we gave food every other day to the mice.
Every other day?
Every other day. It was very strict for the mice. Now for our human, but what we could see is that either calorie restriction or intermittent fasting had a good effect on certain readouts, but only intermittent fasting was improving neurogenesis in the mice, not the calorie restriction. It was very interesting. So then we wanted to see in human what was happening. So we had a group doing calorie restriction and a group doing intermittent fasting. So, and for the human population, the intermittent fasting was actually like the 5-2 diet, so meaning eating 5 days normally, and only 2 days they would eat 600 kilocalories. So like, 3 tiny small meal, like, the equivalent of 3 small cereal bar, but, in a balanced way with protein and carbs and so on. And then what we could see is that, contrary to our hypothesis, because this is science, we thought, oh yeah, surely we will see, a difference only to the people doing intermittent fasting, because that's what we saw in rodent. But no, in humans, the calorie restriction, every day, so basically every day the people ate a little bit less, had a similar effect than intermittent fasting. So we did see that both improve their pattern separation. And then both as well had in their blood an increased level of, we call it the longevity hormone, Clotho. So both calorie restriction of like 20 to 30% and the intermittent fasting, so eating 2 days a week, much less, so half or maybe a third less what you would eat every day, had a positive effect in the human population. Whereas in mice, we only saw a good effect of intermittent fasting.
Yeah, it's fascinating, really fascinating. You know what excites me is that I talked to a lot of different researchers on this podcast. I spoke to Professor Sachin Panda from
Salk Institute.
Yeah, we had a phenomenal conversation about his research on time-restricted eating. Mm-hmm. And he was showing, again, he, like you, started off with rat studies, and they're now moving over to trying to replicate this in humans. Mm-hmm. And it's remarkable the sort of benefits that they are showing, whether it be improved blood sugar control, improved immune system function, losing weight, maybe increased endurance for athletes. It's uncanny that how many different researchers are saying a very similar thing, which is, I think it's safe to say we're not designed to eat food all the time, from the minute we wake up to the minute we go to sleep, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And it doesn't matter what research you talk to about what function in the body they're looking for, reducing how much we eat and having sort of some set periods of time with either low calorie intake or not eating seems to have multiple benefits on the body.
Yeah, I think you're right. There are a load of study. There's one of the leading researcher as well is Matt Metzen, who was the first one trying to promote exactly this concept of intermittent fasting or energy restriction, or indeed having, like a certain amount of time in between meal as opposed just to calorie restriction.
Yeah, and one of the things that I recommend people to do, based upon the research that I've read and what I've seen in my practice, is 12 hours in every 24 hours where we don't eat. I think is, I'm sure you can get more benefit if you go more aggressive than that, but I think that's eating for all your food within 12 hours each day seems like a reasonable, achievable recommendation for most of us.
Absolutely.
And sorry, you were saying about this research.
No. I was saying, I agree with you. I think in our trial, that's what we did when the participants were under the intermittent fasting diet. We're telling them, please eat your 600 kilocalorie within, a certain time, so that you can be at least 16 hours. We were asking them 16 hours without eating, so twice a week, which is not a big ask, to be honest.
No.
It's quite doable. And then again, if you look back at rodent studies, and this is an interesting conclusion that you can take, is that, for example, in animal model of Alzheimer's disease, not just one animal model of Alzheimer's disease, but plenty, if you put these mice under calorie restriction, and the way they do in animal research, often they just do intermittent fasting, so they leave them indeed at least probably 16 to 20 hours without food, is that you could cure Alzheimer's disease just by putting this animal under intermittent fasting.
Wow.
And it's just that, that would be incredible. So the idea is that people are not so keen on, the idea of intermittent fasting. And then you understand that. So, what could you do? What can you find? It would be so easy to tell people, be reasonable and, please go, twice a week, reduce your food intake in content and in, restrict it in time, will increase definitely neurogenesis, that's for sure, but has a lot more benefit. So now, are people ready to do that? It's difficult. So that's why in the lab, we are trying to understand the molecular mechanism that's behind it. So we are really trying to say, now we have our study where people go under intermittent fasting. They do better at memory task. They have increased this longevity hormone Cloto. So basically what we are trying to understand is that how does this happen? How does this work? So that, we can refine the pathways where we have something to play with.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? So, you're saying to avoid one of the sort of typical Western diets, the sort of high fat, high sugar combo diet that we often see in the West. Have periods of time where we are reducing our calorie intake or do some sort of time restricted eating may be beneficial for neurogenesis. Yeah. Are there particular foods that you've found that are really helpful for neurogenesis?
So not just my lab. There are plenty of other labs that have shown, for example, flavonoids, which are contained in fruits with dark skin, like blueberries, or we have a picture of a blueberry there. So, or even strawberries. So lots of, dark skin fruit, grapes will have high flavonoid contents. And we know that, flavonoid will increase neurogenesis. And there are studies in human where by a colleague in Reading University, not too far from here, where they gave actually blueberry juice to participants, and they show that it improves their memory and it improves the blood flow to the brain. So it might be one way, improving blood flow. So for example, this flavonoid improve blood flow, and potentially if you have improved blood flow because the hippocampus is nicely vascularized, you have more factors that reach this area that might stimulate the production of new neurons.
But that is incredible, isn't it? You're saying that blueberry juice can increase blood flow in the brain.
Yeah, that's nicely shown by my Jeremy Spencer in Reading.
I think this just goes to show how much we need to expand out the conversation on food. It's so much more than just energy for the body. It's information. It's blood flow to the brain, incredible. And is that obviously blueberries contain flavonoids, but so does, I think, dark chocolate does as well.
Yeah, dark chocolate as well has flavonoids. Although, because I got this question asked so many times, so once I did the calculation, how much chocolate do you need to eat to increase your blood flow? Let's say it would be too much.
It would be too much.
Then you would have a huge high fat content, or you would have to eat so bitter chocolate, like 100% chocolate. I don't know if you had tried already. It's extremely bitter, and you would need to eat probably 400 grams of that.
Oh, wow.
So a high calorie intake. So probably blueberry might be the best way.
Although some people might be hearing this and going, all right, I fancy the challenge of 400 grams a day.
Quite much.
But isn't that interesting? That sort of reminds me a little bit about some of the studies on wine and resveratrol, because, and again, I'd love to know what happens with resveratrol on neurogenesis, but certainly some of the studies I've read about the reported beneficial effects of red wine, and trying to tie that out to resveratrol, they're sort of suggesting that actually the amount of red wine you would have to drink to get the amount of resveratrol that the studies are showing is, quite a remarkable amount. So, I guess that leads on to a question: what does alcohol do to neurogenesis?
So alcohol itself. So if you just use pure ethanol on cells, basically, or if you do an in vitro experiment, we can leave rodents, away, poor guys, a little bit. But if we take human cells in a dish, human hippocampal cells that can make new neurons or not, and then you will add ethanol, basically you will kill it. But then if you add some resveratrol, that mediates, the cell death, let's say. So, so resveratrol will have an impact indeed. And as you said, the amount of resveratrol you would proportionally need to drink from wine would be huge. So I think the conclusion of, this discussion is really just about balance. Maybe you don't eat 400 grams of chocolate and drink 10 liters of wine, but, maybe eat a little less. We'll have, eating 30% calorie intake less or do intermittent fasting will have the same effect effect, as that. But if you want to do it really nicely, eat a little bit of, fruits. Red wine, if you like, wine is better than white wine. That's for sure, because of the skin of the grape is there. And the skin of the grape is the one containing the resveratrol. So you will have no resveratrol in white wine, for example.
Okay, that's interesting.
So it's only in the red wine because of the skins.
And where were you born, Sandrine, can I ask?
Oh, in Burgundy.
In Burgundy.
I'm not promoting Burgundy wine.
Is there any...
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I wonder if there's any sort of cultural bias creeping in here to the recommendation of red wine. Probably not.
We have beautiful white wine in Burgundy, actually.
Do you?
Yeah, and red wine as well. But to be fair, what I can say now, so that I'm not, being told I'm biased, is that
I'm only teasing, by the way.
But people have measured the level of resveratrol in different red wines. And Burgundy wine are not the one with the highest level of resveratrol. Actually, Bordeaux wine have a higher level of resveratrol compared to Burgundy wine. We don't know exactly why, because resveratrol is produced as a defense mechanism, with fungus. By the grape. So it is, it could be, it's a question of climate and probably of the strain of the grape as well. Wow. So it's a mix. But so Bordeaux wine has a little bit more resveratrol than Burgundy wine. It hurts me to say that, but it's a reality.
But it's good to know. That's a good tip for people. What about omega-3s, which we hear a lot about in the context of brain health? Yeah,
so omega-3 fatty acids, there are lots of studies on that showing that how omega-3 fatty acids are in rodent model that are good for cognition. And especially there are loads of studies that have shown that they are also protecting for depression. And there are even some patient data where they did a clinical trial where they supplement the diet of the patient, not directly by fish, by supplements, so DHA and EPA, and 1 milligram of it, so which is what you probably commonly find, in health stores. And then they show that it had a comparable effect to Prozac for some patient.
Wow.
So this study,
and that's a supplement.
That's as a supplement.
Yeah.
So this study was quite impressive, but we have to take it very carefully because, the severity of the depression of the patient in this study maybe was quite low, and it might not be relevant to all the patients.
Sure.
And people shouldn't stop taking antidepressant and take omega-3 fatty acid supplement. But what people have to be aware of is that when you buy your supplement, watch the label, because you want EPA and DHA. You don't want the other like ALA, which are, not being carried to the brain. So they will not do anything. And some of the cheaper supplements actually are full of the ALA. So you want EPA and DHA.
I think it's a really important point, that, isn't it? And particularly, I think, for, a lot of people are choosing to have vegan diets these days.
Yeah, that's tricky.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, because a lot of those sources of omega-3 contain ALA.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're saying that the brain can't use ALA, is that right?
So you can derive from ALA, you can make EPA and DHA, but we are super inefficient. We are very inefficient. So you would have to eat kilos of ALA to make 1 milligram of EPA or DHA. So whereas you can have, the EPA or DHA you need by eating 80 grams of salmon, for example.
Yeah.
So, which is, but I understand for people who are vegetarian and vegan, you have to go other ways. And I think there are some new products that are algae that are actually containing EPA and DHA.
Yeah, I read that as well,
so
actually.
So that's one way vegan and vegetarian people, can get their proper amount of omega-3 fatty acids that are relevant to brain health.
Yeah. And I think, any brain researcher who I've had on this podcast, including Dr. Lisa Mosconi, who wrote the book Brain Foods, most of them, including yourself, are probably sort of would recommend fatty fish because of the science of the research and showing what it can do for our brain. But as you say, we've got to be very respectful of people who are choosing not to do that.
Absolutely.
And what are those other methods where they can also get some of those benefits off the omega-3s. I just want to go back to exercise for a minute, because you mentioned running as specifically being able to increase rates of neurogenesis. Do we know what other forms of exercise can do, or is it specific to running, or do we not know yet?
We don't know yet. I think it would be really an interesting question, to see. What we know from my study is that if you let them freely running, you will have an increased neurogenesis. However, if you force them to run, you will not see it. So there is some kind of things we have to be aware from rodent study. In human, we don't know if it's going to be the same, but, likely, is that probably there's an idea of maybe, exercising with pleasure or really wanted to exercise, maybe to have the full benefit. Because if you force the mice, to run, as opposed to just let them run when they want, then you don't see such an effect. So there is probably, to be honest, some kind of, mitigating effect with, are you forced to exercise or do you want to exercise? So we have to be aware of that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess, we are speculating on humans, but it would seem reasonable to recommend to people to do the form of exercise that appeals to them. Because they're more likely to stick to it anyway. But if you're someone who hates running, yet you've heard this podcast and said, this expert in neurogenesis says that running is going to increase the growth of my nerve cells. Well, who wouldn't want that? So they're going to start running every day, but maybe they're going to hate it as they're doing it. I guess this is raising questions, which hopefully a research paper will answer at some point.
Yeah, I know.
Maybe the benefit will be limited.
From extrapolating from the mouse study, I think if people are forced to do an exercise they don't like, I don't think they will have as a great benefit. So I think, yes, I'm a runner, so I like running, so it's convenient for me. But one of my, my kids are still young, but I encourage them, to have a healthy lifestyle. At one point, they were into running, and now they hate it. So I'm not going to force them to run because I can see that, it makes them miserable. But they found other ways to enjoy, namely running after a ball, which is still running, but that's a different concept. And I know, talking to a lot of people who really do not like running, but actually they do a lot of running without knowing it. When you play, any sports ball, you run after a ball.
Of course.
So I think we shouldn't generalize. It has to be running on the road or on a treadmill and, do nothing else. No. As long as you increase, for me, potentially, it's all about increasing the blood flow to the brain, very likely. So, any type of exercise where you are going to achieve that should be beneficial.
When I was researching your work online, there's two things that also came up that we've not spoken about today. One of them is soft food.
Oh, yeah.
And I found that really interesting. Mm-hmm. Could you explain a little bit about how soft food might impact neurogenesis?
Yeah, so this comes from loads of Japanese groups. So all this research has been done in Japan because I think they are very interested in food textures. And then what they have started to show, again, these are rodent studies, that if you give soft food to the mice, so as opposed to, you are describing the chow, so which is crunchy, so it's like little what you give maybe sometimes to your cat, so this is what we give to the rodent, so it's crunchy, and they have to chew on it. And then they decided, okay, let's see if we put that, mash it, put it in water, so it's kind of a liquid diet. So it's amazing. The paper show that if you put a mice, from their normal crunchy food to a liquid diet, the neurogenesis rate goes down like of 30%, which is huge. And then they said, okay, what could that be? So they did a bit some kind of maybe more barbaric experiment where they remove the teeth of the mice, and still give them the hard food somehow, or softer food, but they couldn't chew. Really. So the idea is that, probably chewing or mastication is what will induce neurogenesis. So now there are different hypotheses. It could be that indeed, again, we increase the blood flow to the brain, or we have some direct nerve cells that actually, could be responsible. So again, it looks like, it's not just food content, or calorie intake, but also food texture might have an impact on neurogenesis. And we think it's important. It might sound kind of a funny topic, like, oh, food texture, come on, Sandrine, and say, no, but think about people that are getting older. Often they will be given in retirement, they just get soup because,
puree and soft food.
Exactly, because maybe indeed they have some dental problems. So maintaining a healthy, teeth is very important for the old age, because you will be able to continue chewing.
This is blowing my mind, Sandrine. It really is, because it's the more you look at the body, the more you see how everything's connected. You can't even just look at necessarily the food in isolation. It's how much of that food. It's when you eat that food. It's what's the texture of that food. And we know oral health is critical for systemic health. We know that having gum disease will increase your rates of cardiovascular disease and stroke. So we sort of know that, don't we, from the science, that actually the health of the mouth, the health of the teeth is important for the health of the rest of your body. And it's just, all these little studies that help teasing out some or helping us to hypothesize various mechanisms by which that might be playing out. It's really, I find it so fascinating, really, really interesting. Okay, so a lot of this stuff is the sort of thing, I guess, that 100, 200 years ago, people would be eating sort of real food that required mastication to chew it. And I guess now we've got a tendency, I'm sort of thinking as I go through this, but we're in juice culture and smoothie culture. Could there be a potential disadvantage from, slurping our food down without having to chew it? I mean, who knows?
I mean, exactly. Who knows? I mean, I think, if you eat the least processed food, I think that's the best way to translate that. Basically, if you don't process the food, like we have an image of an apple here in front of us. So instead of to drink apple juice, or even, like if you, have one of these fancy food processor where you get the whole apple, but, in a smooth or, drinkable, fresh juice. What's the advantage of eating a raw apple as opposed to an apple juice? Well, first, it will take you much longer to eat it. So you probably will feel satiated, as opposed to just ducking down, your juice. Then if you drink juice, you lose all the fibers, right? And then now we can add, if we want, to make this argument a little bit more compelling of mastication and chewing. Well, I mean, the apple is crunchy and you will chew on it and you will eat it as opposed to drink it. So I think, if we want to summarize the whole thing and give, an easy tip, is like, don't eat your food too processed. And if you do that, you probably will do quite well.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm actually staring at my apple juice there in the corner now, and I might not have it anymore.
But it's cold pressed, so you have the fibers at least in there. But you will drink it much faster than if you would eat an apple, right?
No question.
So that's the thing.
How many apples are in there? 3, 4 apples, maybe.
Possibly.
It's pretty hard to eat 3 or 4 apples in a row.
Exactly.
It's pretty hard to do that. The final thing we've not discussed, which I think is of critical importance, is what does sex do to neurogenesis?
Okay.
That's from your TED Talk.
Yeah, it is in the TED Talk. So this is a study from, or some studies from Elizabeth Gould, where, and when I was doing my postdoc in the US, I was with another postdoc, and we always thought about doing this experiment. We should measure neurogenesis, after mating of the rodent, and we never found the time to do it because we thought surely it's going to have a good effect. But then some other people did it. And then, either for male and female, so intercourse will increase neurogenesis.
Wow.
So again, you can say, why and how again, you could think about, is it a form of exercise? Maybe not for rodent though, because they're much faster, but for human, definitely. And then again, you have, this idea of, maybe having a good time potentially. So these are rodent study. We can't say for sure, this is happening in human. No one did a human study where they measure cognition, with people having intercourse and not having intercourse. But
somewhere to go with the research, maybe.
But it will be probably hard to get funding for that, I suspect.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, super fascinating discussion. Sandrine, what I often do with I interview a whole wide variety of guests on this podcast. Not everyone is a scientific researcher, but I'm always intrigued for those high-level researchers who come in and speak to me. Have you changed anything in your own lifestyle since you started doing your research?
Yeah, good question. So I was already a convinced runner, so I'm just happy to have another reason to say, well, at least it's good for my brain, and if I'm not training for a race, I'm saying it's just a good, healthy, things to keep going. And then definitely the intermittent fasting. So I definitely started to do intermittent fasting as soon as we got, some of the mouse study out.
Wow.
So I'm indeed not, asking participants to do things I wouldn't do myself.
No.
So, and intermittent fasting is definitely one of them. The PhD student who is, on the project, she's doing intermittent fasting herself, for example. And some people that were in my lab before were very much into calorie restriction, after they saw the data. So, and then we try to have a healthy lifestyle as well at home. My kids know, what's good and what's bad.
My kids do as well, actually.
So it is like...
I hope they don't rebel when they get older and go, I'm sick of all this healthy living that Daddy keeps talking to us about.
No, that's the danger. So we try to apply it at home with exactly a little bit, of flexibility indeed, because you don't want to alienate them. So...
yes. It's tricky though, isn't it, as a parent?
Yeah. No, it is. Because you want to do the best for them, and then, once in a while, of course,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, no, I think it's so telling what researchers do and, what research compels them to change. And I think, some intermittent fasting is probably a really good tip for people who are listening.
Yeah. And then, it's not that hard to do. And usually I do that. I will never do that on the weekend because this is where, maybe I'm with friends or family and it would be really hard to do intermittent fasting on the weekend. Some people do, though. But
is it not easier at work when you're busy?
Yeah, exactly.
And you're almost too busy to eat?
Exactly. So at work, it's very easy. Very, very easy to do at work.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think that's a great tip. Well, Sandrine, look, what I try and do right at the end is to leave people with a bit of positivity.
Yeah.
And the whole point of this Feel Better, Live More podcast is to inspire people to become the architects of their own health. And I think the conversation today has shown just what a healthy lifestyle can do for our brain health and, potentially the growth of new nerve cells. Can you leave the listener with a few top tips? I mean, you probably already mentioned them, but maybe 4 top tips for what they might be able to do to improve the health of their brain? Yeah,
I think the number one good news, and that some people were not aware of, is that you can still make new neurons in your, adult brain. So nothing is lost. That these new neurons have a functional impact on learning memory and your mood. Wow. And this is why, trying to live the best you can to, keep the neurogenesis going is important. And then the way people can do that is that, trying to sleep well and, limit stress, but sometimes it is difficult. So if you cannot limit stress, can you balance it out with maybe a good diet? Eat, lots of fruit, vegetable, fish, if you, are not vegan or, or vegetarian. And then finally try to exercise, do something you like.
Yeah. Brilliant tip. Sandrine, thank you.
Thank you.
Are you on social media? I haven't noticed a huge presence, and it may be because you're too busy actually doing real research that we can all apply in our lives. Yeah. But for people who are listening to this who might want to connect with you or let you know what they thought of our conversation today, do you, can you sort of point people as to where they can find you? So
on Twitter, we have
what's your handle?
It is Thurine, so it's Thurine. At Thurine. So, but if they search Sandrine Thuret, they will find that on Twitter.
And I will put links to this and your TED Talk and some of the other articles you've done.
And then we have a lab webpage, but this is linked, I think, to the Twitter account and to the TED Talk probably. So
for each episode, I create a show notes page on my website, and I'll make sure there are links to your lab, there are links to your Twitter, and some of the articles that you've done as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today, and good luck with all your research.
Thank you.
That concludes today's episode of the Feel Better, Live More podcast. I found that conversation super inspiring, and I hope you did too. I think it's amazing that the more we learn about the body and the brain, the more we understand the critical importance of the lifestyle choices that we make on a daily basis. As I wrote in my very first book, The 4-Pillar Plan, consciously change your lifestyle and you will unconsciously change your biology. That phrase is very apt in the context of today's episode and brain health. As always, do let Sandrine and I know on social media what you thought of today's episode and what small changes it has inspired you to make in your lifestyle. You can see everything that we talked about, including links to more of Sandrine's work, her articles, and her TED Talk on the show notes page, which for this week is at drchatterjee.com/Sandrine, which is Sandrine. As we discussed on today's show, chronic stress can have damaging effects on the brain in the short term as well as the long term. My brand new book, The Stress Solution, really dives into this topic so that you can understand where stress lives in the modern world and, more importantly, what you can do about it. The book is full of simple and accessible strategies that you can apply in your own life to reduce your stress levels so that you can live a happier and calmer life. Since the book came out just over 1 week ago, the response has been phenomenal. So far, in the first week of release, there are an incredible 70 reviews on Amazon. All of them have been 5-star. Thank you to all of you who have already bought a copy. You have helped send the book to #1 in all books, which means that I can get this information out to so many more people. If you haven't got a copy yet, you can pick one up right now in paperback or in the audiobook, which I am narrating. All of the international book links for The Stress Solution are available at drchatterjee.com/book. If you do enjoy my weekly podcasts, one of the best ways that you can support them is by leaving a review on whichever platform you listen to podcasts on. You can also help me spread the word by taking a screenshot right now and sharing this episode with your friends and family on your social media channels. Of course, you can always do it the good old-fashioned way and simply tell your friends about the show. Your support is very much appreciated. That's it for today. I hope you have a fabulous week. Make sure you have pressed subscribe, and I will be back next week with my latest conversation. Remember, you are the architect of your own health. Making lifestyle change is always worth it, because when you feel better, you live more. I'll see you next time.